You've rewritten the same morning routine 4 times this year. New planner in January. New app in March. A 5 a.m. wake-up challenge you gave up on by day 9. And every single time, you told yourself the same thing: I just need more willpower. You watched the videos, you bought the journal, you set the alarm across the room so you'd have to get up to turn it off, and none of it stuck longer than 3 weeks. If you're honest, some part of you has started to suspect the problem is you. That you're missing some gene for discipline that other people were born with. You're not. And the advice you've been following was never designed to work long-term in the first place. Here's what almost nobody tells you. The entire Western model of discipline is built on force. Push harder. Grind through resistance. White-knuckle your way past the urge to quit. It treats your mind like an enemy that needs to be overpowered every single day, which is exhausting, because you are fighting yourself from a standing start every morning for the rest of your life. Japan solved this problem differently, centuries before American self-help turned discipline into a personality contest. The Japanese approach doesn't fight the mind. It trains it, quietly, structurally, almost invisibly, until the behavior you used to force yourself into becomes the behavior you no longer have to think about at all. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why willpower was never the mechanism that mattered, and you'll walk through the real principles Japanese discipline is built on. Principles backed by actual behavioral research, not folklore. But there's one particular ritual buried in the middle of this video, barely 2 minutes long, used for centuries by craftsmen before they ever touched a tool, that acts as the hinge for everything else. Once you understand what it's actually doing to your brain, every other principle here stops feeling like a technique and starts feeling like common sense. Let's start by taking apart the idea that's been sabotaging you. The mainstream belief is that discipline is a resource, something you either have a lot of, or you burn through by mid-afternoon. This is why you've been told to protect your willpower, to avoid decisions early in the day, to save your discipline for the things that matter most. It sounds reasonable. It's also why you failed on a schedule you could predict in advance. You weren't lazy, you weren't weak, you were operating on a model of the mind that was wrong from the start. Willpower isn't a battery that drains, it's a threat response. Your brain treats big, sudden changes in behavior the same way it treats actual danger, flooding you with resistance before you've even started. So when you set a goal like, wake up at 5 a.m. and meditate for 30 minutes, you're not lacking discipline. You're triggering a biological alarm system every single morning and then blaming yourself for flinching. That's not a character flaw. That's just what a nervous system does when it's ambushed. Which means the struggle you've been having was never a willpower problem. It was a design problem, and that's actually good news, because design problems can be fixed. This is where Japan's approach begins. The first principle is called Kaizen, the practice of continuous, deliberately tiny improvement. In manufacturing, Kaizen became famous for transforming entire factories one small adjustment at a time instead of one dramatic overhaul. But its real power is neurological. Researcher Robert Maurer, who studied Kaizen's application in behavioral medicine, found that changes small enough to feel almost laughable, a single push-up, 1 sentence of journaling, 1 minute of stretching, bypass that fear response entirely. The amygdala doesn't sound the alarm over something that small, so the behavior slides in underneath your resistance instead of colliding with it. This is the same principle behind Stanford researcher B.J. Fogg's work on tiny habits, which found that shrinking the behavior, not increasing your motivation, was what actually predicted whether people stuck with it. The practical shift is this: whatever habit you've been failing to start, cut it down to 1/10 the size you think it should be, and start there tonight. The second principle is Shoshin, the beginner's mind, approaching something you've already attempted before as if you know nothing about it, without the accumulated frustration of your past failures weighing on you. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because every time you've tried and quit a habit before, your brain quietly files that habit under things I fail at. The next attempt starts with that failure already loaded in, which is why the 5th try at a morning routine feels heavier than the first. Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer's research on mindfulness found that people who approached familiar tasks with fresh, beginner attention, rather than running them on autopilot shaped by past experience, showed measurably better performance and lower stress around the task. The practical shift is this: tonight, mentally discard every previous version of this habit you've tried and failed. You are not trying again. You are starting, for the first time, with no history attached. The third principle is gaman, quiet, uncomplaining endurance through discomfort, without needing it to be witnessed or praised. Western discipline culture is loud. It announces itself, the public challenge, the accountability post, the countdown timer for everyone to see. Gaman works in the opposite direction, and that's precisely why it lasts. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on self-control found that willpower reserves were more easily depleted when effort was tied to outside validation or performance pressure, when you're bracing for an audience, not just doing the thing. Discipline practiced privately, without the need to prove it to anyone, draws on a steadier, quieter kind of resolve that doesn't run out the same way. The practical shift is this: pick one part of your new habit and tell absolutely no one about it. Let it exist only for you. The fourth principle is shu-ha-ri, a framework for mastery that moves through 3 stages. First, you follow the rules exactly, without deviation or improvisation. Then you begin to break from them once you understand why they exist, and only at the final stage do you transcend them entirely and make the practice your own. Most people trying to build discipline skip straight to stage 3. They want their habit to be personalized, optimized, and interesting immediately, which means they're making dozens of small decisions every day about how to do the thing, and every decision is another chance to talk themselves out of it. Research on decision fatigue from psychologists, including Kathleen Vohs, has shown that each additional choice you're forced to make depletes the same limited cognitive resource, making the next choice, including the choice to follow through, harder than the last. The practical shift is this: for the first 2 weeks, follow the exact same version of your habit every single day, at the same time, in the same way, with zero customization. Remove the decision entirely. The fifth principle is the one I mentioned at the start, a short ritual practiced by Japanese craftsmen, martial artists, and tea masters before any disciplined act begins, sometimes called mokusō, a brief period of silent stillness used to mark the transition into focused practice. It's not meditation in the way you've been told to think about meditation. It's a doorway, a fixed repeated cue that tells your brain the old context has ended and the new one has begun. NYU psychologist Peter Gollwitzer's research on implementation intentions found that pairing a specific action with a specific, consistent trigger dramatically increased follow-through compared to relying on motivation alone, because the decision gets made once, in advance, instead of being relitigated every time. This is the hinge. Kaizen shrinks the habit, Shoshin clears the emotional residue, gaman keeps it private, shu-ha-ri removes the decisions, and mokusō is the 2-minute doorway that tells your brain it's time to walk through all of it, automatically, without a single argument. The practical shift is this: before your habit, sit in complete silence for 60 seconds, every time, in the same spot. Nothing else. Just the same doorway, opened the same way, every day. The sixth principle is Ikigai, your reason for getting up, the quiet thread that connects a daily action to something that actually matters to you beyond the action itself. Discipline that isn't tied to anything tends to hollow out after the novelty wears off, which is usually around week 3, right where most people quit. Researchers studying the population of Okinawa, one of the longest-lived communities on Earth, found that a strong, clearly felt sense of Ikigai was consistently associated with sustained daily routines and better long-term health outcomes, independent of diet or genetics. The habit didn't feel like discipline to them. It felt like an expression of who they already were. The practical shift is this: write one sentence about why this specific habit matters to the person you're becoming, and read it right before your minute of silence. So here is the only thing to actually do tonight. Not a system. Not 5 habits stacked on top of each other. One action. Pick the smallest possible version of the one habit you've failed at the most, sit in silence for 60 seconds first, and then do it, once, tonight, telling no one. That's the whole shift. You were never missing the discipline gene. You were fighting your own nervous system with a method built to trigger it, instead of quietly training it with a method built to bypass it entirely. Tell me in the comments which principle you're starting with tonight: Kaizen, Shoshin, gaman, shu-ha-ri, mokusō, or Ikigai. Send this to the one person in your life who's rewritten their morning routine more times than they'd like to admit. And if you want the rest of what this channel has to teach about building a mind that doesn't need to be forced, subscribe to Stillness and Steel.